In the summer of 2023, an idyllic tropical paradise became the setting for a crime so brutal, so unthinkable, that it would send shockwaves around the world. The bright beaches of Thailand, known for their tranquility and allure, hid a dark secret, one that no one could have anticipated. The brutal murder and dismemberment of Edwin Arrieta, a well-respected surgeon, would soon make headlines across the globe. But even more unsettling than the crime itself was the revelation of the person responsible, a man who appeared to have it all: Daniel Sancho. The story that would unfold would challenge the very image of a promising young man, the son of a famous family who was seemingly living the dream in one of the world's most beautiful places. But behind the carefully crafted image, there lurked something far darker. What was it that led Daniel Sancho, a man with so much ahead of him, to commit such a horrifying act? It was a crime of unimaginable brutality, a crime that would leave questions lingering long after the evidence was laid bare. What caused this man, who was known to many as charismatic and full of promise, to take such a violent turn? And perhaps most chilling of all, was it something that had been building all along? Could anyone have predicted that one of their own would be capable of such horror? This isn't just the story of a crime. It's the story of a promising life that spiraled out of control, of relationships tested beyond repair, and a tale of murder, dismemberment, and the shocking consequences of a single act of violence. The world watched in disbelief as the investigation into Edwin Arrieta's murder revealed the depth of Daniel Sancho's actions. The first clues surfaced quickly: an investigation that started with an innocent appearance, a tourist destination, a friendly encounter between two men, would soon uncover the most gruesome of revelations. This is the story of the man who killed Edwin Arrieta, dismembered his body, and threw everything he had away in a single violent moment. But what happened in those final moments? How did a simple confrontation between two men lead to such a savage crime? In this documentary, we'll retrace the steps that led to the murder of Edwin Arrieta. We'll examine the chilling details of the crime, the investigation that uncovered it, and the trial that shocked the world. But we'll also look at what drove Daniel Sancho to commit such a heinous act. Was it the pressures of a privileged life, a hidden instability, or something else entirely? Through interviews, expert insights, and an in-depth look at the events as they unfolded, we will explore the details of one of the most chilling murder cases to come out of Thailand in years. A life was lost, a family was torn apart, and a man's future was destroyed forever. What would drive a person to such extremes? What drives someone to murder their fellow man, especially when they seem to have so much to lose? Could the tragedy of Edwin Arrieta's death have been avoided? Or was it a consequence of a dark side hiding in plain sight? Stay with us as we uncover the shocking truth behind the Daniel Sancho case. This is the story of a crime that stunned a nation and the world. It is the story of murder, betrayal, and the unraveling of a man who once seemed to have it all. Thailand, known for its shimmering beaches, vibrant streets, and unparalleled landscapes, is often portrayed as a paradise. Tourists flock to its pristine islands, drawn by the crystal-clear waters, lush jungles, and a sense of carefree adventure. Bangkok pulses with energy, and the coastlines glisten under the golden sun. Yet, in the shadows of this seemingly perfect paradise, there lurked a dark and violent secret, a crime that would forever change the perception of this tropical haven. Amidst the beauty and tranquility of Thailand, Edwin Arrieta, a successful surgeon, had found peace in his surroundings. To the locals and tourists, Edwin was a man who embodied optimism. He was well-liked and admired, his career in medicine elevating him to a place of respect. Edwin had made a name for himself, not just through his medical expertise, but through his genuine passion for life. His calm and kind demeanor drew people in, making him a beloved figure in the community. The world seemed to be at his feet. But Edwin's peaceful life would be forever shattered by an unlikely encounter, one that no one could have predicted. Enter Daniel Sancho. Sancho, a young man from a wealthy family, had ventured to Thailand seeking a new beginning. At first glance, he seemed the opposite of his surroundings, out of place amidst the carefree energy of the beach resorts. He had the charisma to fit in, the looks to blend in, and the confidence to make his mark. But there was more to him than met the eye. Beneath the polished surface of a privileged life lay deep undercurrents of instability and unresolved tension. His father, Rodolfo Sancho, a well-known Spanish actor, was widely respected, and Daniel had grown up in the spotlight. The public's perception of him was that of an attractive young man from a famous family, a charming, well-connected individual who could have anything he wanted. But the pressures of living up to an illustrious family name began to weigh on Daniel. As his father's fame grew, so did the expectations placed on Daniel to live up to a legacy that seemed impossible to escape. On the surface, it appeared that Daniel had everything: wealth, connections, and opportunities. But behind the facade was a young man who struggled with his own identity. His desire for adventure was often overshadowed by his inner turmoil. The stability of his family's wealth couldn't hide the cracks in Daniel's psyche. Daniel had faced his own share of troubles. There were whispers of past encounters with law enforcement, moments where his behavior had raised alarms but never escalated to the point of serious concern. He had made impulsive decisions in the past, but nothing that ever hinted at the darkness he was capable of. Family members, friends, and even casual acquaintances saw him as a charismatic figure, but his underlying insecurities simmered just beneath the surface. It was only a matter of time before those insecurities would erupt in an unimaginable way. Thailand's vibrant streets and peaceful beaches may have appeared to be the ideal backdrop for Daniel's self-discovery, but they would become the stage for something much darker. The paradise that so many came to enjoy would soon be stained with blood. Blood that flowed from Edwin Arrieta, an innocent victim whose life was taken in a brutal, senseless act. It was a chance meeting that would set the stage for a tragedy no one could foresee. Daniel Sancho and Edwin Arrieta met in Thailand, two strangers whose paths crossed in a world full of unfamiliar faces and fleeting connections. Edwin, a seasoned professional with a thirst for knowledge, had traveled to Thailand for both relaxation and personal growth. Daniel, meanwhile, was searching for something he couldn't quite name. Perhaps adventure, perhaps a way to escape the weight of his family's expectations. Both men were on a journey, though theirs would intertwine in the most horrific of ways. At first, their interaction was casual. The connection was almost instant. Two people meeting in an unfamiliar place, both looking for companionship, both eager to share experiences. Edwin's easygoing nature and enthusiasm for life contrasted sharply with Daniel's underlying sense of discontent. Edwin was the consummate professional, focused on his career, but never too busy to enjoy the simple pleasures in life. He had built a career on helping others, yet in his final days, it was he who would become a victim, swept into the chaos of Daniel's troubled soul. There were signs, however, that something was amiss with Daniel. As their conversations progressed, Edwin began to notice moments of tension, subtle, almost unnoticeable shifts in Daniel's mood. Daniel's laughter, which appeared lighthearted, sometimes carried an edge, a hint of something darker lurking beneath. Edwin, ever the optimist, didn't dwell on these moments. To him, it was simply a brief interaction with someone he didn't know well enough to judge. But looking back, it becomes clear that the cracks in Daniel's persona were visible if only Edwin had known where to look. Daniel's behavior was at times erratic, especially when discussing topics that involved personal achievement, his family, or his perceived shortcomings. Despite his charm and outward confidence, there was a simmering restlessness within him, an anxiety that seemed to boil over with increasing frequency. For Edwin, who had spent his life saving others, these signs went unnoticed. He was drawn to Daniel, captivated by his charisma, unaware that beneath the surface, Daniel's mind was beginning to fracture. As they spent more time together, their conversations began to shift, becoming more personal. The cracks in Daniel's facade widened, and his insecurities began to seep through. Edwin, though a skilled surgeon with years of experience, couldn't fully comprehend the depths of Daniel's inner struggles. He saw a young man who seemed on the verge of something. But what? That something was, he couldn't have imagined. In these early moments of their relationship, there were no obvious signs of violence, but there were hints of discomfort, small frictions that set the stage for what was to come. Subtle arguments about trivial things, moments of awkwardness, and disagreements about seemingly insignificant topics. All of these moments would later seem like harbingers of the horror that was yet to unfold. Both men, in their own way, were under pressure. Edwin had a career to maintain, a life he had built with hard work and dedication. Daniel, on the other hand, was battling against the shadows of his own life, his past, his family's legacy, and the pressure of living up to an image that no one could escape. It was in these small, seemingly innocent moments that the seeds of tension were planted, seeds that would grow into something far more dangerous than either could have imagined. As their time together in Thailand continued, the relationship between Daniel and Edwin would begin to unravel. What seemed like an innocent connection would soon become something darker, something that no one could have foreseen. It was supposed to be just another night in paradise, a fleeting escape, a chance to relax and enjoy the moment. But what transpired in that room would forever alter the course of two lives and reverberate around the world. In the days leading up to the murder, Daniel Sancho and Edwin Arrieta appeared to be enjoying their time together. But there were cracks in the surface, tensions that would come to a head in a brutal act of violence. It's a scene that plays out in 1,000 different ways in the minds of those who hear the story. An argument escalating, voices rising, emotions boiling over. But the truth is far darker than any simple fight. On that fateful night, Daniel Sancho and Edwin Arrieta were in a secluded room in a villa, a place that, up until then, was seen as a sanctuary of peace and relaxation. What led to the explosion of violence in that room? What words were exchanged? What final trigger sent Daniel into a violent rage? It started with a confrontation. The details are unclear, but what is known is this: emotions flared, anger surged, and in a matter of seconds, something snapped. Daniel Sancho, a young man who had always been in control of his emotions, lost control. Perhaps it was a series of small provocations, the mounting pressure of a life he couldn't live up to, or something deeper that ignited the explosion. But the result was undeniable. Edwin Arrieta, a respected surgeon, would not survive the night. In a chilling turn, what happened next was not just a murder, but a savage dismemberment. Details of the crime are harrowing, but the truth is that Edwin Arrieta's body was mutilated in ways so disturbing that it left investigators stunned. The violence of it all, what had been done to his body, was unimaginable. The act was not just an outburst of rage, it was an act of complete destruction. A moment when something primal took hold of Daniel Sancho. Something far darker than anyone had expected. But what drove him to this? Experts speculate that it may have been a combination of factors. An overwhelming sense of frustration, emotional instability, and perhaps a deep-seated rage that finally broke free. Whatever the cause, the result was one of the most gruesome acts of violence imaginable. To understand the psychology behind such an act, we must look deeper into Daniel Sancho's mental state. What kind of man could transition from a conversation to such brutality? In cases like this, we often see an individual who has been hiding deep, unresolved emotions, anger, fear, or feelings of inadequacy. When those emotions become too much to bear, the release comes in the form of violence. What's troubling in this case is the fact that Daniel didn't just kill Edwin, he dismembered him. This is an extreme response, one that suggests a complete detachment from any sense of remorse or empathy in the moment. It's as though he was not only trying to kill, but to erase Edwin entirely. In a horrific twist, Daniel Sancho's psychological breakdown was laid bare in those violent moments. What had once been a life filled with promise now seemed consumed by an insatiable rage that took control and left nothing but devastation in its wake. The details of the crime are disturbing, but they are essential to understanding the magnitude of the act. The dismemberment was not done in a moment of panic or desperation. It was calculated, methodical. It was a deliberate and chilling display of power over another human being. What drove Daniel to such lengths? Was it a momentary lapse in judgment, or had something been building inside him all along? In a sense, the act of dismemberment stripped away the facade of normalcy that had surrounded Daniel Sancho. Behind the facade of the privileged young man, something darker had been festering, waiting to be unleashed. The night of horror didn't end when Edwin Arrieta's life was taken. It only marked the beginning of a nightmare that would unfold over the following days. What Daniel Sancho did next would leave the authorities and the world reeling. Once the brutal murder was completed, he did not flee the scene. Instead, he disposed of the body in a gruesome fashion. The body parts were scattered, hidden, and discarded as though they were mere objects to be discarded, no more than a careless afterthought. When the police were called to the scene, they were prepared for an investigation into a missing persons case, but what they uncovered was far more disturbing. The severed remains of Edwin Arrieta were discovered in multiple locations. The horror of the crime was beyond what anyone could have imagined. What began as an initial search for a missing person quickly transformed into a case that would grip the entire nation. As news of the discovery spread, the shock was palpable. This was not just a murder. This was a crime that seemed to defy logic. The brutality of the dismemberment sent a shockwave through the community. A place known for its calm and peacefulness was now a backdrop to one of the most gruesome murders the world had ever witnessed. What we're dealing with here isn't just a case of murder. This is an act of complete dehumanization. The fact that the body was dismembered is significant. It's a form of control, a way to exert power over the victim. In cases like this, we often see a complete breakdown of empathy, where the perpetrator no longer views the victim as human. The discovery of Edwin's dismembered body only deepened the mystery surrounding Daniel Sancho. The authorities soon launched a manhunt for the suspect, Daniel Sancho, the young man who had been seen with Edwin just hours before the murder. The manhunt was swift. Sancho had fled the scene, but his trail wasn't hard to follow. The authorities, armed with evidence from the crime scene, quickly zeroed in on him. It wasn't long before Daniel Sancho was captured and brought in for questioning. The locals, still reeling from the brutality of the crime, were left in shock. The paradise that had once seemed so inviting was now tainted with the reality of violence. What had caused this young man, a person who had seemed so normal, to commit such a brutal crime? The investigation into Daniel Sancho's actions was just beginning, and what was uncovered in the coming days would only add to the mystery. The chilling truth was coming to light, and the world was watching as the investigation unfolded. The discovery of the dismembered body, the frantic search for the killer, and the sudden realization of what had transpired, this was a case that would haunt those who witnessed it for years to come. The courtroom was tense, a mixture of the grieving, the curious, and the skeptical, all in one room. The trial of Daniel Sancho had begun, and with it came a slew of questions, each more disturbing than the last. How could a man with so much going for him, from a well-known family, end up accused of such a brutal and savage crime? The world watched as lawyers, experts, and witnesses took the stand, offering their insights into what led to Edwin Arrieta's tragic death and Daniel Sancho's shocking actions. In the early stages of the trial, the defense and prosecution presented starkly different narratives, each vying for control of the courtroom. For the defense, the story was one of instability and mental breakdown. They sought to paint Daniel Sancho not as a cold-blooded murderer, but as a man struggling with emotional turmoil and unaddressed psychological issues. They argued that the murder was the result of an uncontrollable fit of rage, a momentary lapse in judgment fueled by the overwhelming stress that had been building in Sancho's life. Experts were called in to support this theory. Psychiatric evaluations suggested that Sancho had struggled with anxiety and emotional distress for years. potentially exacerbated by pressures from his famous family and his personal insecurities. Some even suggested that his mental state at the time of the crime might have led him to act out of character, perhaps not fully aware of the enormity of what he had done. The defense argued that Daniel's actions were not premeditated, but a result of intense emotional strain, a tragedy of fate rather than a cold, calculated crime. On the other side, the prosecution painted a far more chilling picture. They argued that this was no crime of passion, but a calculated act of violence. According to the prosecution, Daniel Sancho had planned the murder in cold blood, driven by darker motivations that were yet to be fully understood. They suggested that the brutality of the crime, the dismemberment of Edwin's body, and the deliberate disposal of the remains showed signs of premeditation, a deliberate choice to conceal the murder and ensure that Edwin would never be found. The case became a back and forth between two starkly different portrayals of the accused. For the defense, Sancho's actions were an unfortunate consequence of his mental state. For the prosecution, they were the result of a deeply troubled man willing to go to great lengths to protect himself or achieve his desires, whatever those might have been. As the trial progressed, Daniel Sancho's statements would become pivotal in shaping public perception of the case. In a chilling moment, Sancho took the stand himself, offering a glimpse into his state of mind. He confessed to the murder, but his words seemed detached, as though the gravity of the situation hadn't fully sunk in. His demeanor, quiet, almost clinical, gave little away. He spoke of the fight with Edwin, the violent escalation that followed, and the decision to dismember the body afterward. But his tone remained unsettlingly neutral. There was no sign of deep remorse, no cries of anguish. Instead, there was a strange calmness to his words, as if he were recounting an event far removed from the horrors he had committed. To some, this was an indication that he had never fully come to terms with his crime. To others, it reinforced the prosecution's theory that this was the work of a man who had committed murder with chilling precision and had little regard for the consequences. What was most striking was how little Daniel seemed to truly comprehend the weight of what he had done. His statements suggested a lack of understanding, an almost disturbing detachment from the life he had taken and the dismemberment that followed. Was it possible that Daniel Sancho had completely lost his sense of guilt? Or was it that the depths of his remorse had simply not yet revealed themselves? The question of whether he truly understood the impact of his actions remained at the forefront of the trial, casting a shadow over the proceedings. For the victims of the crime, Edwin Arrieta's family and friends, each word Sancho spoke was a painful reminder of the loss they had suffered. For the public, it was a moment of reckoning, a chance to confront the darkness that lurked behind a man who, on the surface, seemed to have everything. As the trial reached its conclusion, the question remained: was Daniel Sancho the product of an unstable mind or a calculating murderer hiding behind a mask of confusion? As the trial came to a close, a deeper question loomed over everything. What was truly going on inside Daniel Sancho's mind? What drove a man, seemingly of privilege and promise, to commit such a horrific act? The answer, perhaps, lies in the complex web of his life, the pressures he faced, and the psychological factors that may have been festering beneath the surface long before that fateful night. Psychologists and criminologists were quick to offer their analysis, offering insights into the mind of a man who had gone from a promising young man to a convicted killer. They pointed to several factors: family pressure, a history of emotional distress, and perhaps most importantly, the idea of the perfect storm that can push someone to their breaking point. Daniel Sancho came from a family of high status, where expectations were often unspoken but deeply ingrained. As the son of a prominent figure, there was an immense weight placed on his shoulders from an early age. These pressures, coupled with his apparent need to prove himself, may have contributed to his emotional instability. Experts theorize that growing up under constant scrutiny might have led him to develop a sense of inadequacy or anxiety. Was it this pressure that played a role in pushing him over the edge? Adding to the complexity were the signs of emotional trauma that Sancho reportedly dealt with throughout his life. While the specifics remain unclear, it's likely that personal issues, whether related to relationships, self-worth, or unresolved family dynamics, fueled a sense of internal conflict. The question remained, did Daniel Sancho lash out in a moment of unrestrained rage, or was this a tragic culmination of years of pent-up emotion? Psychologists also theorized that Sancho may have exhibited signs of a personality disorder, one that could manifest in erratic or violent behavior under certain conditions. Could he have been dealing with a form of psychopathy or personality disorder that impaired his ability to process guilt or remorse? As experts weighed in, it became clear that understanding Daniel Sancho's psychological makeup would require a deep exploration of his past, his relationships, and his internal struggles. Whatever the cause, the ultimate question remained: did Daniel Sancho kill out of rage, desperation, or cold calculation? Was he a man who simply snapped under pressure, or did something more calculated lie beneath the surface? The mind of a killer is often far more complex than we are willing to accept, and in the case of Daniel Sancho, the truth may never fully come to light. Edwin Arrieta's life was one that many envied. A talented, dedicated surgeon who had built a respected career, Edwin had a future brimming with promise. He was known for his kindness, his infectious energy, and his unwavering commitment to his work. Those who knew him described him as someone who brought light to every room he entered. His passion for medicine wasn't just a career, it was his calling. But it wasn't just his professional life that stood out. It was his genuine care for people, his ability to connect with others, and his thirst for adventure that made him loved by so many. He wasn't just a surgeon, he was a friend, a mentor, a man who believed in helping others, whether it was through his work or in his personal life. His energy was contagious, his laughter unforgettable, and his compassion knew no bounds. He had already touched so many lives with his presence, and he was just beginning to truly make his mark on the world. Edwin Arrieta's future was wide open until it was violently stolen from him. To those closest to him, the loss of Edwin was incomprehensible. Friends, family, and colleagues still struggle with the shock of his untimely death. How could someone so full of life, so full of promise, have his life ended in such a brutal and senseless way? The news of Edwin's murder devastated not only his loved ones, but also his community in Thailand, where he had built a new life and career. His family described him as someone who never stopped giving, whether it was his time, his knowledge, or his love. His friends shared stories of his adventures and the joy he found in discovering the world around him. Edwin had been in Thailand not just to work, but to explore, to immerse himself in the culture, and to live life to the fullest. He was still so young, still so much to accomplish. His death didn't just rob him of his future, it left a hole in the hearts of everyone who knew him. Friends who had spent time with him in Thailand recalled how Edwin would light up a room with his positive energy. His colleagues, especially those who worked closely with him in the medical field, described him as someone who excelled in his profession, always striving to help others and improve himself. He was driven by a deep sense of responsibility, and it was clear to anyone who met him that he had a profound love for his work. To lose someone like Edwin was more than just the death of a friend or colleague. It was the loss of someone who had touched many lives in a meaningful way. The shock of his murder rippled through not just his personal circle, but the broader medical community as well. It was a tragedy that seemed almost unreal. How could such an extraordinary life end in such a violent, cruel manner? His death didn't just affect his family and friends. It left a lasting emotional impact on everyone who heard his story. The world seemed a little darker without him in it. The community in Thailand where Edwin had made his home was forever changed by the news. People who had interacted with him, admired him, and appreciated his dedication to his work were left in disbelief. The vibrant energy he brought to the local community was gone, and in its place was a shadow of sorrow. His legacy, though, will not be forgotten. Edwin Arrieta's name is etched in the memories of those who knew him, and the lives he touched will continue to carry his light forward. Despite the horror of his untimely death, his contributions to the world, his kindness, and his impact on those around him are what truly define his life. In the wake of Edwin Arrieta's tragic death, Daniel Sancho was arrested and convicted of his murder. His brutal crime, the murder, dismemberment, and disposal of Edwin's body, left an indelible mark on the justice system and on the families of those involved. In a courtroom that captivated the attention of many, Sancho was sentenced to life in prison for his actions. But while the courtroom drama may have concluded, Daniel Sancho's life was far from over. As the door of the courtroom closed behind him, he was led into a new and much darker chapter of his life. He now resides in Suratani prison, far from the life he once knew. The son of a well-known family, once living in the lap of luxury, is now confined to a stark and unforgiving reality. Behind the prison walls, Sancho's life is a far cry from the privileges he once enjoyed. He now faces a future of solitude and confinement, a future that is defined by the consequences of his violent actions. Gone are the days of carefree travel and adventure. Gone are the expectations of success and a bright future. In prison, he must now confront the weight of what he has done and the isolation that comes with being locked away for the rest of his life. While his family and friends watch from the outside, unable to undo the irreversible damage caused by his crime, Daniel Sancho must grapple with the reality of his actions. The life he could have had, the future that was taken from him and Edwin Arrieta, now lies in tatters. His every day behind bars serves as a constant reminder of the brutality he unleashed upon another human being. Psychologists and experts have speculated on the effects of prison life on someone like Daniel Sancho. For someone who was once surrounded by the comforts of privilege and a network of influential individuals, the harsh conditions of prison could prove to be psychologically damaging. Will he ever find a way to cope with the remorse of what he did? Will he ever find peace, or is he doomed to live with the weight of his actions for the rest of his life? The possibility of redemption is uncertain. While some might argue that prison could serve as a form of rehabilitation, others would say that there is no redemption for someone who committed such a brutal act. What can a man like Daniel Sancho hope for in a world that has turned its back on him? Is there any way to atone for the life he took and the life he destroyed? For the families affected by his crime, there is no resolution, no solace. While Daniel Sancho serves his life sentence, Edwin Arrieta's family is left to cope with the loss of a loved one they will never see again. The emotional scars left by his death will never truly heal. In Suratani prison, Daniel Sancho's fate is sealed. His name will forever be associated with one of the most chilling crimes in recent memory, and as the years pass, his life behind bars will be a daily reminder of the destruction he caused, both to Edwin Arrieta and to his own future. As we piece together the chilling details of Edwin Arrieta's murder, one question persists, haunting every corner of the case. What drove Daniel Sancho to commit such an unthinkable act? The why, the driving force behind such extreme violence, remains a mystery that continues to elude experts and the public alike. Was this the result of a fleeting moment of rage? A crime of passion ignited by something as simple as a heated argument or betrayal? Or was it something much deeper, an eruption of psychological instability that had been festering for much longer than anyone could have predicted? Many experts in criminal psychology have weighed in on the motivations behind Sancho's crime. Some argue that his privilege, combined with a sense of entitlement, may have played a key role. The pressure to live up to the expectations of a famous family, the relentless pursuit of status, and perhaps even an underlying feeling of inadequacy. All of these could have triggered something in Sancho's psyche that led to the horrific violence. Could it have been an explosive reaction to a perceived betrayal? An emotional breakdown under the weight of a life that didn't match the facade he tried to maintain? Others suggest a different angle. They point to a potential history of mental instability, either undiagnosed or ignored, that could have pushed Sancho to the edge. What if this crime wasn't a result of a single event, but rather the culmination of years of emotional turmoil? The signs may have been there all along. buried beneath layers of charm and privilege, hidden from those who knew him best. Could mental illness or a deep-seated psychological fracture have played a role in the crime? Theories abound. Some point to Sancho's ability to detach from the gravity of his actions, as evidenced by his seemingly cold confession after the murder. Could this suggest a deeper disconnection from reality, a lack of empathy or remorse? A trait that often accompanies certain personality disorders. Yet there is another possibility. Perhaps this was a premeditated act, planned with cold, calculated precision. If this is the case, it would be a chilling indication that Sancho's capacity for violence was more methodical than impulsive. But why? What could have pushed him to plan such a gruesome crime in the first place? Despite the many theories, the truth remains elusive. Was it an eruption of emotion? Was it mental instability? Or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? A far more sinister motivation that only Daniel Sancho truly understands. The unanswered questions continue to linger, as do the possibilities. And while experts, criminologists, and the public may speculate, there is one thing that remains clear. This was no random act. This was a crime born from something deeply embedded in Sancho's life, his mind, and his choices. But what exactly that something is may never be fully understood. As we reflect on this case, it's impossible not to wonder, could this happen again? Could a seemingly ordinary life, one filled with promise and potential, unravel so completely? The answer may not be simple, but one thing is certain. No one is truly immune to the darkness that can lie within. As the story of Daniel Sancho and Edwin Arrieta comes to a close, we are left not only with the shock of a brutal crime, but also with lessons that echo far beyond this single tragedy. The case highlights the dangers of unchecked privilege, of a life seemingly sheltered from consequence, where the pressures of maintaining an image can sometimes mask the deep fractures beneath. Sancho's apparent detachment, his ability to take another life without remorse, challenges our understanding of the human mind and the limits of what we can hide behind polished exteriors. This case also underscores the fragility of human relationships. What began as an encounter between two men, one seeking adventure, the other, perhaps, simply living his life, spiraled into violence when trust was shattered. It's a reminder of how thin the line can be between the ordinary and the extraordinary, the peaceful and the violent. The small fractures in a relationship, the misunderstandings, the unnoticed warning signs, they can build into something catastrophic. But above all, the case of Daniel Sancho serves as a chilling reminder that not all is as it seems. Even in the most seemingly perfect environments, even in the most idyllic places, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. Paradise can be deceiving. It's easy to forget that the same world that promises tranquility and beauty can sometimes harbor unspeakable violence. So, as we reflect on what we've learned from this case, one thing stands out. We must remain vigilant. The human psyche, with all its complexities and contradictions, is not easily understood, and no matter how perfect the picture may seem on the outside, we must never forget that the shadows can be just as real as the light.